Thank you very much, Angus. It was terrific to be here today to talk to Caesar about his business and about the problems that he sees his business facing because of the economy that we're in. Jim Chalmers is out today with a big grin on his face, but he is a doctor of spin, not a doctor of substance. This is not mission accomplished. Inflation has remained too high for too long in Australia. And because of that, interest rates have stayed too high for too long. And Australians have paid the price. We've seen a reduction in living standards here that is unprecedented. It's been a faster and a deeper collapse in living standards than we have ever seen, around 7.8%. So if people out there are feeling poorer, it's not all in your heads. You, in fact, are poorer. You're poorer than you were 3 years ago. You're poorer under Labor. And that's because of the poor decisions, the broken promises and the bad policies of this government that has kept inflation too high for too long. Now, that includes an additional $347 billion of government spending, which Michelle Bullock, the Reserve Bank Governor, has said is one of the things that has made it so hard for her to bring interest rates down sooner. And yet the 12 interest rates that have occurred under this Labor government have made it so much harder for businesses, so much harder for households to get ahead. Caesar was telling us that his customers are just bobbing along the surface right now. Nobody is shooting the lights out. The economy is essentially ground to a halt. We're in a per capita recession for the last 7 quarters. Real wages have gone backwards and consumer sentiment is down. We need a change. We need a back-to-basics economic approach to get our economy back on track. I think we're happy to take some questions.
Well, only the Treasurer thinks that the prices of everything are under control. Only the Treasurer thinks that. Australians don't think that because they've seen a cumulative increase in the prices of things they buy every day of over 10%, almost 18% for working families. They're paying an additional, or they've paid an additional $50,000 on their mortgages. They're paying a record level of personal income tax under this government. They're seeing record levels of business insolvencies. But for the Treasurer, that's mission accomplished. Only this Treasurer could see that as mission accomplished. I mean, this has been a disastrous period economically for Australian families, for Australian businesses. And when you only have to look at the international comparisons to see this. We are absolutely at the back of the pack in dealing with core inflation, in getting interest rates down, the back of the pack in terms of GDP per person, and Australians are paying a high price for that. And we've seen that talking today, and we've seen it in businesses right across this country.
Given these issues you raise over core inflation, does that mean you believe there should not be a rate cut next time?
Unlike the Treasurer or the Labor Party, I don't get into giving free advice to the Reserve Bank Governor. She is independent and she should be independent to make the right decision for Australians. But what I will say is that this government has no plan to restore Australian standard of living. They have no plan to restore Australian standard of living. In fact, we've seen multiple reports now demonstrating that Australians won't get back to the standard of living they had when Labor came to power until 2030. That's how much damage Labor has done to the economy. Till 2030. We simply can't afford another 3 years of Labor. Australians are poorer after this 2.5 years of Labor. We can't afford another 3 years of it.
You blame Labor for the inflation crisis. Do you give them any credit for the fact inflation has come down?
It is homegrown inflation. I mean, we have heard the Reserve Bank Governor say that on multiple occasions. This is Labor's homegrown inflation. This is Labor's homegrown standard of living crisis. This is Labor's homegrown cost of living crisis. And this is Labor's homegrown cost of doing business crisis. And we've consistently seen it. You know, only... Well, prices aren't coming down at all, and there's no sign of that happening, and no one's saying that's going to happen. The trouble is we've seen baked-in increases in the price of what people buy. No one's seeing a reduction in what they pay for at the supermarket. No one's seeing a reduction in their insurance bills. But this Treasurer is congratulating himself for the biggest collapse in Australian standard of living in our history. Only this Treasurer could see that as a victory.
Chalmers has described this as a soft landing for the economy, and that's something that they've been planning and preparing to do with this.
Well, if his plan was to cause more damage to Australian standard of living than we've ever seen before, than any of our peer countries, then he should fess up to that. And that has been his plan. And his plan is that we won't restore our standard of living until 2030. This is his plan. This is a guy who doesn't understand economics. He doesn't understand business. He doesn't understand our economy. He's barely worked in the private sector, and when he did, he hated it. He simply doesn't know how the economy works. And we see that in the outcomes we've had since he's been in that role and since Labor's been in power.
If the coalition does win government, are you suggesting that prices will come down?
We will restore Australian standard of living. That's what we must do. And that's what this government should have set out to do from the start. It shouldn't have spent its first 18 months on a divisive referendum. It shouldn't have spent an additional almost $350 billion, much of which, a significant portion of which of the bad spending we've opposed at a time like this. It's inappropriate spending. Well, standard of living is what we've got to focus on, and standard of living has to get back to where it was fast, not by 2030, let's be clear. I mean, this is a government that thinks it's okay to trash Australian standard of living and then have a plan where it takes till 2030 to get it back to where it was. Only a Labor government could think that's okay.
Just on your small business tax rate plan, when will you provide a list of activities that will and won't be covered? And can you clarify, is golf in allowed?
Well, we've been clear, it's about food. We've been clear about that from the start. It's about food. There's no ambiguity about that. We'll put the costings out for all of our initiatives in the lead up to the next election.
That was going to be my next question. Why have the costings on the lunch plan not been released?
Well, you know, by convention, costings are put in before the election. We'll tally them all up and we'll put them out before the election. That's what Labor did at the last election, and that's what we do by convention in this country, because we're still yet to see Labor's big spending agenda. We haven't seen all of that. I mean, we know they're spending a lot more money, and the result of that is we've got the biggest government we've ever seen in our history. We've seen Labor adding 36,000 new Canberra-based bureaucrats. Only a Labor government could think that the answer to the challenges we face now is more bureaucracy, not more business. But that's the situation we've had under this Labor government. There was a question over here.
Offset the cost of the measure against cuts elsewhere in the budget for the fringe benefits?
Sorry, I didn't quite
Will you
catch.
offset the cost of the measure against cuts elsewhere in the budget?
Oh, okay. So we will put out all of our costings in good time ahead of the next election, but we're very conscious of the fact that government needs to make ends meet, and that every dollar that is spent by a government is a dollar that is earned by hard-working businesses like this one, by hard-working people across this country, and so we're going to always be hugely respectful